My name is Becca Starr. I am the Literature and Language and Fiction Librarian over at Portland Public Library. So welcome to our Spotlight Lecture we're not supposed to pick favorites, but some of our favorites. Bill Roorbach and Richard Russo. We're very excited to have them. So first, I'd like to thank Bunker Brewing for allowing us to take over their beautiful space as per usual. Thank you to Print for always being game to sell books at our Spotlight events and for supporting Portland's literary scene. And thank you to MWPA for always showing up in support of writers. Lastly, I want to thank you, the audience. Like many people around in 2020 and most of 2021, I started to hate my job. It made no sense because this job is as close to a dream job as I would ever hope to get. And I realized that it was because a huge part, which is to me the most fun part, of my job was missing, and it was all of you. So I want to thank you, the supporters of the Portland Public Library, for loving us as much as we love you, even when our doors were closed for so long. On that note, I am extremely pleased to share that if you haven't heard, the downtown library in Monument Square has significantly expanded hours. We are now open on Mondays from 10 to 6, Tuesdays from 10 to 5, and Saturday, from 10 to 3. Not Sundays yet. And there should be cards on the tables that have those hours, so feel free to pick one of those up. We have a bunch if you need it. And we also have some great events that are coming up here at Bunker. On May 18th, we have Reza Jalali in conversation with Food Trot about Dear Maine, the trials and triumphs of Maine's 21st century immigrants. And on July 6th, debut author Morgan Talty talks about his book, which is already getting a lot of good buzz and praise. It's called Night of the Living Reds. He'll be in conversation with Gregory Brown, and we hope to see you there too. Once again, welcome back into the world of live public events. And here to introduce our authors is Taryn Bowe, Associate Director of MWPA.
Yeah.
Tonight. It is so great to be here with these literary giants. I think we can definitely acknowledge that, even if we're not picking favorites. Thanks to the co-hosts, which Becca mentioned, but include Print, Bunker Brewing Company, Portland Public Library. And I'm just going to dive right into introductions so we can start talking about this book. First of all, thank you to Rick Russo. We are so lucky to get to experience this conversation tonight. Richard Russo is the author of 8 novels, most recently Everybody's Fool and That Old Cape Magic, 2 collections of stories, and the memoir Elsewhere. In 2002, he received the Pulitzer Prize for Empire Falls. Bill Roorbach is the author of 5 previous books of fiction before this one that we're going to celebrate tonight, Lucky Turtle. His previous books include The Girl of the Lake, the Kirkus Prize finalist, The Remedy for Love, the best-selling Life Among Giants, and the Flannery O'Connor award-winning collection, Big Bend. About his latest book, Lucky Turtle, author Lily King says, a thrilling, blistering tale of young love and old hate and the steady endurance of both. In its starred review, Kirkus Review noted, an epic love story, no greater reading pleasure to be had anywhere. And Kirkus said a lot of lovely things, but they also said, look out, Roorbach has created the sexiest man seen in literature. So if you weren't already intrigued to read and buy the book, there you go. So excited to hear more. Thanks, everyone.
That's right, you're gonna need that. Right?
Is that Jim?
No. Seriously, this is pretty cool, huh?
Talk about the sexiest man in literature. Oh my God, I'm so happy.
Only one of these giants has the word giant in the title of his book, though. All right, let's get underway here. It really is thrilling to be doing this again live. I think Zoom filled in for a while it could, but I think like so many screen things, it just reminds us what we're missing. So it is just wonderful to be here talking with you tonight, Bill, and to be live in front of all of you guys. It really is special. I thought we would begin talking about the setting of this book a little bit, and I noticed that in your acknowledgments, you mentioned the fact that you spent a lot of time in Montana when you were a kid. And of course, boy, Montana really comes alive in this book. Tell us a little bit about the relationship. What was it like spending summers in Montana, and in what sense did those summers inform Lucky Turtle?
Oh, thanks. I feel like Montana is one of the characters in the book, really. There's a few seats right here if people are tired of leaning, or if there's any 15-year-olds who want to come sit. Oh, that's such a good question, and I also dedicated the book to my Uncle Bill. My Uncle Bill Roorbach is my mother's little brother, and when I was in high school, I wasn't like a jailbird kind of guy or anything, but I was always in trouble, and my mom thought my uncle, who was a minister, could straighten me out. So she sent me out to Montana, and I spent 3 high school summers there. But the first one, my uncle, I thought he'd have, it would be the iron fist of God on me all summer, but he was actually a beautiful, a very sweet man. His idea, his ministry was in the town. He'd go into the parks and find. They weren't called homeless then; they were called bums or hobos, and they led very hard lives. So he would go find them and see who he couldn't find an apartment. He'd take up collections in the church and the town to help people. He assigned me a guy whose name was Kills the Sky, he called himself. It's an affectation, but there it is. And this kid was dangerous, and my uncle thought you'll be a good influence, but he was all of the influence on me. And we did great things. We had a lot of fun. He was my uncle. We would talk about all the time. He's kind of a criminal philosopher, and we'd always talk about how we wanted to go into the wilderness and just live in the wild, and we could do it. And my uncle was like, "You think you could live in the wilderness, do you?" My uncle was an outdoorsman par excellence, and he drove us one day. He goes, "I'll take you up there." We go up to Bob Marshall Wilderness. He drops us in his Land Rover. He drops us at the edge of the million-acre Bob Marshall Wilderness, and he says, "I'll meet you at such and such town in 2 weeks." And he said, a line that's in the book, "Keep track of the days, because that's the first thing you're going to lose." And you're like, "What? You're really doing it?" "Yep, we're really doing it." He just dropped us. He had those old canvas-covered canteens. He gave us a canteen each, fish hooks, fishing line, no poles, and that's it. Whatever we were wearing, and off we went. And I thought it worked fine. It was high summer. It was Montana, super dry, so there were no bugs, so you could just sleep out at night. It was quite a beautiful experience. And in that setting, my friend there was no one for him to push against. So he was all saint. And I've tried to write about it before, and I've never been able to get it quite right. So I got a female protagonist so that you could have that kind of relationship. Anyway, we fed ourselves, we made it through, and many years later, my uncle used to write me letters every so often. He wrote and said, "I don't know if you remember this kid. He has called himself some ridiculous name, but he was just killed at the bar in a fight. Never stopped fighting." That was killed. So what I did was resurrect him, I think, and I resurrected the saint side. I forgot about the criminal side. I let him be his best self. brought him back to life. And so all that's Montana. And it happened in my relationship. It's that soul place when you're that age, the thing that gets caught in your heart.
Absolutely. There is also, I think, a clear through line between this book and some of your earlier books, because like Summers with Juliet and they note here, Summers with Juliet, Temple Stream, of course. The natural world. Montana is a character in this book, but so is the natural world in a way that extends beyond Montana. And but talk a little bit about that. What is that? I mean, clearly you worship the natural order in a way that is not quite as common, I think, anymore as maybe it once was. You are tuned to the natural physical world in a way that certainly not every writer is, but the vast majority of us, we kind of walk on sidewalks, don't we? And you've really linked with this book to your earlier books too, this love of the natural order.
I wouldn't have used it, but I like the word worship in there.
Yeah.
You know, it really is a place where I go to, I don't know, be in that space.
Mm-hmm.
It still is. And I think my uncle probably instilled a lot of that. Because you get out and you'd be like, let's go fishing. It'd be Saturday. And his wife would say, don't you get stuck out there. And he's like, no, I gotta preach to him. And we go up in the mountain and he would say, Bill, let's get the Land Rover stuck. The assistant minister needs practice. So it's really a service we'd be doing.
Yeah.
And you'd get the thing caught up to the fenders in mud, and we'd spend 3 days just fishing and being men in the wild. But to him that meant being God's people or something.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversations we had, I mean, that is how we straightened me out, I think. And it was deeply associated with the wild. So I like the idea of it.
And it's in this book. It's also kind of what straightens. Well, Lucky was already pretty straight, but it's really what straightens Cindra out. She goes from a city kid to someone who has a really, really important relationship to nature. She not only enters Lucky's world, she becomes part of that, and that happens to the other characters who become part of their. I mean, they really build a family out there in nature, and so that's the trajectory that these characters take. It seems to me is becoming part of the natural order.
It's a place where difference doesn't matter. So their heritage, their racial makeup, all that stuff is able to fall away in that setting, in those settings, and becomes a world they can build their own world and their own kind of family and their own. But of course,
well, it is Edenic. In that sense, but which leads to my next question, because of course in that garden there was a snake, and evil exists in this book as well. And one of the book's themes, of course, is about injustice, racial injustice, certainly. But sticking for just a moment with nature and the land, I found myself thinking about as watching these kids overcome exactly what you were talking about in terms of the civilized world, to become who they become when they escape that. I did find myself thinking, though, about the land that you so clearly love in writing about this book. that land is also at the root of an awful lot of problems in America, and has been for a very long time. You think obviously I mean, slavery was directly connected to the land and what was done to the land, and of course Europeans pressing westward, taking Native American lands that most tribes had no concept of ownership of land. What a strange thing to do with land. Own it, build walls on it, keep other people out of it. And so I have this thought that you must have been thinking about that during the writing of this book. The land that is so profound. It can be used for good purposes, as it is in this novel, but it's also the source of so much injustice that we see, even right straight up through American history. Land, certain land is reserved for certain people. Other people are not allowed on that land, and it's a source of, it's maybe the original source of injustice.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. So right now there's another crowd pushing west.
Yeah.
Maybe to fail. I hope so. Yeah, and I wondered a lot writing is this my story to tell, and I had to find a part of it that was my story to tell, which was being out there in my soul place and what that meant. Yeah. Well, the book is about displacement, but also replacement a little bit, and then what can a few people do, and what do we owe each other, and what's wrong with the people who can't respect the treatment they would expect for themselves,
Right.
That they can walk directly out of their church service where they're learning the golden rule, and it's as if it just disappears when they're in their daily dealing.
Yeah.
So you think of, my uncle got fired from his church for preaching against the Vietnam War. He got fired, and he's never so happy. It was like getting his Land Rover stuck, because his real church was in the streets. And the people he was dealing with were the displaced people. And the displacement, it looked like alcohol, it looked like turf wars, it looked like drugs, it looked like all sorts of carelessness, but it was just what you're talking about. It's like what happens, how this stuff redounds through history.
Yeah.
Right down to the point where a kid kills this guy, and Lucky, Kills couldn't walk down the street without a fight.
Yeah.
He was in a daily fight.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. Suddenly there I am walking along with him, and I'm learning I'm thinking about what he's gone through. I come home and go, Uncle Bill, these guys, we gotta talk to the police. He goes, oh, the police won't help.
Yeah.
But I think you're just noticing it.
Yeah.
It's always been there.
Yeah.
So what can we do? What can you and I do?
Yeah.
I think, here's what we'll do. I'll try to find those guys. They're some of the high school football team, and I'm just going to talk to them about how much they hurt Kill's feelings.
Yeah.
And he was so innocent. And he'd go find these kids, and he'd go, now I hear you put a beating on Kills this guy. Oh no, that was Rick over there. He'd be like, well, when you come to church Sunday, stay after with your folks, and I want to talk about this. And he goes, and oh, by the way, we're going to be building some housing. I need you guys. You're the strong kids. But we have football practice. Oh, I talked to the coach. He's going to be there too. This is going to be your practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
He did what he could.
Yeah.
It didn't stop. What can one person do? Well, one person can do a lot. And I think Lucky's existence in the world just does a lot.
It sure does in this book, and I want to come back to that definitely. Since you brought up you said that when you were writing this book, you were thinking a lot about what part of this story is really yours to tell, which implies that you were at least a little bit concerned about cultural appropriation, should we say? And this is the first book. You also, at the end of this book, in your acknowledgments, you also acknowledge your sensitivity readers.
Yeah.
Because this is the first time you've ever written a book that had to be read in that particular way before it was published. Can you talk a little bit about?
Okay.
Have you had any woke warriors come up and tell you that this isn't your story to tell?
Publishers Weekly.
Yeah.
A very lazy review. So they just went to that. Didn't have to read the book. A little bit of flat copy and an insult, and they were done. Yeah, I worried about it less at the beginning, and then as I went along and showed people, I started hearing really helpful comments from friends. And I was writing as a woman's point of view, so that was part of my concern.
You're just stealing lock, stock, and tomahawk here, aren't you?
But to tell my own story, if that were the only material I were allowed, my story would be populated with a lot of difference.
Yeah.
My whole life, colleagues, family, the whole musicians I work with. It's all. I couldn't tell my own story without populating it with everybody. And even in this room, we could find lots of things to bully you about, I'm sure. In fact, I'm about to start because I'm just looking around going, really?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. So when it finally, I got hurt in the middle of making this book. So I had 2 years off where I couldn't really read or write very well. And I had finished a draft.
Mm-hmm.
And then I forgot I wrote it for a while. And then as I came back to life, I was like, what about that book? And I began to read it and brought it out to friends who helped. And the world has shifted a little bit. I think the general tenor of the discussion in the United States had shifted toward a very healthy, it's really just manners, but a healthy caring about other people a little bit. And I have been part of seeing that. Anyway, I got sensitivity readers. Unofficially, I had friends who read it, Chinese friend, black friend, and there's just so many groups. I just said, can you read it? Women, can you just read this? And anything you need to tell me, tell me. And they told me useful stuff. It was like making the writing better as much as anything.
Yeah.
But accidentally it makes me better, right? And then you hope that bounces onto readers, perhaps. But okay, the official sensitivity readers were pretty good. One of them was she's a novelist. That was helpful. She, a black woman. She said that was the first line of her letter was, "I am a black woman." And I read this novel with great attention. I love this, I love that. She told me about the sentences, about the structure, what she admired. A whole page of talking about my book as novelist to novelist. And then she said, but here my job is to offer a sensitivity reading. And as a black woman, and I have to say, an overweight black woman, she said in her letter, I had a couple of things in the book that made me uncomfortable. 10 or 12, that's it. I'm not saying change any of them. I'm not saying to change them. I'm just saying I want to point them out so you know about it. And if you changed some of them, that would be really helpful. But here they are, and she listed these 10 or 12 things. Very specific. On page 122, XYZ happens. Your character, Francie, says XYZ. And she said, I just felt in that moment like it's not, maybe it's something Francie would say, but it's not something I would say. It's not the response I would have. The response I would have would be more like XYZ, you know, so eloquent and not at all threatening, not at all like, you know, I was defensive for some of the readings because some of them, the reader would be coming in with, you know, missiles and tanks, you know. But she came in as an artist, talking to an artist, and it was so great. I learned so much from her. And then I worked on the passages, finding that each job I did made that character richer, made the interactions richer. In one case, it changed the whole trajectory of the rest of the chapter.
Yeah.
I had to rewrite because of just a very small thing she had pointed out. And then here, and the other things were just one word, you know. She'd be like, really? You have to? You know? And no, I didn't have to. Yeah, another thing someone else pointed out was, you know, when there's a black character or a Chinese character, which I have, or Native American characters, Crow characters, I should say. You always refer to their either their race or their tribal affiliation or their heritage. All those terms are divided very carefully in the worlds of people who have to battle like kills. So I felt like I was walking alongside him, learning all this stuff. Well, I lost my thread. I lost my thread. Just thinking of that guy. I just lost my thread. That letter from my uncle of kills his dad. I was like, he forgot how much I loved him. I think. Anyway, so
but it was. It sounds to me like it was a lot like working with a good editor.
It was,
and anybody who makes the book better is you gotta say great. Anybody who make you look smarter than you are. That's the way I feel about it.
That's right. Yeah. Smarter, more compassionate. All those things. And there's two ways to be a great editor. One of them is to do all of that, and the other way is to be really stupid and say stupid things, and you fight against the dumb.
Right.
But the way you fight against the dumb is you go, that is wrong. But I allowed her to read it that way, so I have to fix it anyway.
Right.
Even though it's just a misreading, I cannot allow that misreading. So kudos to the dummies. Some of them play dumb. You know? Like I had, do you know Susan Campbell? Did you ever run across her? She's dead now.
No.
She would say, "Can we just put this in a footnote? Let's put this passage in a footnote. It seems a little extra. Let's put it in a footnote." I'd be like, "A footnote? Yeah, footnotes are so elegant." So we put lots of stuff in footnotes. This is Temple Stream. Footnotes all the way through. And then at the very last second, she goes, "Let's cut all the footnotes." She knew I wouldn't do it.
So she worked on you in stages. She didn't suggest something she knew you'd rebel against. She just took them away from you a little bit at a time.
This guy's never gonna let me take his gallbladder out. So anyway, yeah. So it was a form of editing. Certainly was. Yeah. Certainly was. It was also a form of just communication with all kinds of people. It was really great. Some of them came at me in a threatening way. I had to think about my defensive response, and sometimes it would take me weeks to get over it. Yeah. How mad I was about something.
Yeah.
But that's what I've learned too, Rick. You probably, if anything that makes me mad, I know they're right now.
Of course.
If you don't care, it's like, well, that doesn't matter. But if I go like, fuck you, then I write in the margin now, fuck you. Yeah. And then when I see that notation, I go, okay, I gotta fix it.
Yeah. Exactly. I think we should hear a few pages of this book.
Oh, wow, thanks. So let Oh, I didn't bring one. Oh, well. Did I borrow yours?
I did.
Do you want the gallery or do you want those?
I better use that because this has a lot of corrections.
Yeah.
That's the bound galley they send out for, thank you, reviewers and friends. Isn't this cover fantastic? They really did a great job. And it's so fun to have like Lily's name on there and old friends all over it. So I'm going to read the first paragraph, and then I'm going to read the first paragraph, and then I'm going to read I'm so used to having a mask on, this feels natural. I'm going to read the opening of what is unnamed, but which is part 2, because it shifts energy so much. I think it won't be a spoiler. That is not.
Can you do that? Is it physically possible to read this without a book stand or something?
I think I can do it. This is chapter 1. I am Cindra Zoeller. I was born in 1980 in Watertown, Massachusetts, outside Boston. I wrote a report in 5th grade, so I know Massachusetts is an Algonquian name meaning big little hills. I grew up there sledding the biggest of the little hills and skating on mill ponds and swimming in the lakes and rivers and the ocean with the other kids, though rarely with my sister, who was much older and mocked my love of the great outdoors, sat home reading, and I will never mention her again. I adored my father, who was a cabinet maker, or when business was bad, a roofer. He hated roofing. My mother and I did not get along. She broke my ankle once by accident, but in a rage, and did not take me to the doctor. And then, when I was 16, I got in trouble. There, that was fast. My actual life begins with meeting Lucky, is why I'm hurrying. That was chapter 1. Then on page 103, I'm going to find what I want. Oh, I did name the parts. It says part 2. Wouldn't it be awful if it's part 3 isn't named? Because I think I changed that somewhere along the way. Yeah, part 2, chapter 24. My son Rick, who's now in his early 20s, began having these weird dreams about age 12. More than a decade ago, cityscapes and maps and things happening within the maps and cityscapes. Not the usual people things, but his kind of drama. Cities growing, new buildings, new forms of transportation, whole neighborhoods rising and falling and being replaced. And to capture the dreams, he started drawing and mapping, annotating and labeling, studying isometric and anaximetric drawing technique from dense books, always in the library, that one. Something more than a hobby, maybe a compulsion, not yet a profession. He could hardly explain it. He'd wake in the middle of the night and draw these places, seaports, back alleys, the interiors of warehouses, the holds of ships, fantastical trade routes, topographical prospects, fanciful factories making products he named but couldn't explain, never just the one elevation, but each new structure turned this way and that, including Inside Out, which has a name I forget. Repeatographed skylines, penciled blueprints, vivid Sharpie-colored waterfronts, towering cardboard models of great bridges, and Conte crayon renderings of abstract spaces, mind as matter, all brick red, and vehicles too, crazy-looking things, also the highways and tracks and air cushions they traveled on. He developed a blocky, perfect handwriting to emulate the lettering he found on blueprints. He was on the way to a doctorate in engineering and a power career in city planning, but I didn't know that and saw him more as a budding artist. He didn't care much for that idea, nor for art class. Instead, he excelled at math, excelled at physics, surpassed not only his teacher's expectations, but their abilities. Took classes at the local branch of the state college, wrecked the grading curve, internships and summer programs at the likes of MIT and UCLA. Girls meant nothing to them unless they could factor fractals. On his walls were no bikinis, but posters of infrastructure only, and that 80s boy band, now that I think about it, New Kids on the Block. seemingly cute young men looking over their shoulders and past the lens and into my son's heart, unbeknownst to me. Even that poster was buried under the large sheets of art paper I'd get him, later whole rolls of paper, more and more expensive Hanson, Strathmore, Fabriano. Weekends I'd venture into his stinking room with snacks. I allowed apples, peanut butter, celery sticks, never a bit of sugar. He could fly off the handle on the basis of a single jelly bean. And if I'd knocked on his door at the proper juncture, he'd give me a tour of his world in progress, a world without people, only spaces, all of them carefully measured, every sheet of paper related to the next, washes of watercolor to provide atmosphere, his notation in a mysterious hand. Little English, languages he dreamed, copious paragraphs, my magical boy, his hair black as the sky between stars on a clear winter's night, his eye blue as my father's, honestly more beautiful and handsome. And tall, his hair in a braid down his long back, pudgy for years, till through this or that boyfriend he discovered the gym and got playing big. Proud parent, I let it all just burgeon, bemused on the one hand, concerned on the other. I mean, you picture your kid playing soccer, or at least excelling in chess. Then one hot August evening, the latest roll of expensive paper having reached into our hallway and unrolled out the sliding doors to our deck, I was stopped by a mountainscape, beautifully, if a little schematically rendered, but shaded with gouache colors, subtle as hues, marching lines of mountains, something familiar in those peaks and valleys. Now, where is this? I said. Here, he said, pointing to the next blank piece on the paper, space on the paper. And right in front of me, he started drawing close up, sketching with his pencils, erasing to make highlights, a few strokes of color, wetting his thumb to shade it all in, a kind of bluff coming into focus, endless mountains behind, and then a new angle, and a bluff again, and all the mountains around it, and then a new angle, then another, dazzling speed and confidence, till the bluff took center stage, a landform like no other, a turtle shell and straining neck, legs made of cliffs. I gave a shriek, scared the poor kid, cried out again, covered my mouth, couldn't help it, burst into tears, didn't need to be dramatic, fell to my knees, put my cheek on the ground, long form tears, the boy hugging my shoulders. Turtle please. Now I'll read the rest of the book. Thank you.
I'm really glad you read what you did, because I did want to ask you about the structure of the book and your handling of time in it, because I mean theoretically there was another way to write this book. You could have begun it closer to time present and then gone back into flashbacks, but you have no idea that that's going to happen on the first 100 or so pages of the book, and then suddenly you're flashing forward into something much closer to the present. And we learn that the present by the end of the book is very near the present because the pandemic comes into it at the very end, bringing us right up to speed time-wise. Yeah. So I guess my question is, how did that structure suggest itself to you? Was it the way you were thinking about doing it from the beginning? Is it something you learned along the way?
Yeah, my editor said, "Do we have to have masks?" I think so. If that's where we are in history. Anyway, I started. The very first draft started in present, story present, and the past stuff was really, at first, the very early glimmerings was kind of a flashback, really. Yeah. I just got more interested in that, and so I started writing it bigger and bigger. And for a while, I had Lucky doing some of the narration, super problematical. Oh my God, because of who he is.
Right. Language is not.
This isn't going to work.
Yeah.
So I stopped that on the advice of a couple of readers, and then for a while I was kind of lost with time. Time was a very confusing. I had a third time later for a while too. Not a good idea. So late in the, this is after, no it's not, no, it was before I got hurt. I said, let's start in the past, and that's when the structure started to take shape. But where to put the present?
Yeah.
So for a while it was past, past and a half, and then present and a half. But then where's my, if this is part 2, why does part 2 suddenly leap into the present? And you get a half sections. It was structurally wasn't working. And then I just remembered that, feathering it in, like when I used to do, plaster jobs and stuff when I was a kid, so I just added a little bit of the present, back to the past for several chapters, a little more of the present, more, and then back to the past for a little less, until the past is pretty much finished.
Used up,
But flavors of it continue to the very end. But mostly by the last section, it's all in the present.
Yeah.
To the middle, it's a blend. It was kind of work like that. And then the present story I chose at first outweighed the past story by 200 or 300 pages.
Wow,
The original manuscript was 700 pages.
Wow.
And so I just realized it needed to be a different story. And only then, and this is fairly recently in the history of the book, only then did Ricky become the important figure.
Yeah, and he really is.
And then he because I could feel the book, I was talking about this last night with Edison, was that, you start your book with, it's like a rocket going off. That's your story, and you've got a tank of rocket fuel, and at some point the rocket fuel runs out. And the tank can only hold 80, 90, 100 pages of rocket. The rocket is all the, description, the setting, all the story, that's the fuel.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you can feel it running out. You can feel gravity tugging at your story. so if you drop Ricky in, like the thing I just read, that re-energizes things. It's a new story. If you can catch the reader's interest, a new tank of fuel, and it's a new rocket if you've got it set up right. And so that rocket carries you through a little more, and then you gotta go get it. You gotta keep refueling.
And you have the wonderful sensation that I always love in a book that manages to do it well, is that sense that when you leave one place or one time, you come back to it, and you say to yourself, yes, I was just wondering about that.
Yes.
I was just thinking about her, and suddenly there she is.
Yeah.
And so that just energizes everything when that happens. I thought it worked wonderfully. When the first time you flashed forward, I thought, what?
Yeah.
But then the second time, oh, thank God, yes, we're back. We're back to this now. I knew this was going to be important, and it just works splendidly, I think.
And you really have to trust the reader, but you can't abuse the trust by introducing something and not coming back to it, or abandoning a storyline that has become more interesting than the original story. That's dangerous. Right?
Yes, it certainly is.
So you have to.
You always have to. You have to be going someplace that's as interesting as the place you just left, right?
And it has to happen really.
And it has to happen really quickly.
Really quickly.
Yeah.
Right? How many books have you read? Present company accepted. Absolutely. Where you're like, oh my God, this book has the answer to life's problems.
Yeah.
And I'm just, oh my God, it's like I'm in love. And then on page 103, it goes like, okay, I'm tired of this. Or you're not, and then suddenly it switches subjects to grandma. And you're like, I don't want to read about grandma. I really like Bobby. Where is he?
Yeah.
So all that happened in my book. I just have learned to fight it, and also the other thing you learn is to hear people's criticisms, because people won't say the book lost energy. They'll say something else, and you have to be able to read through it and go, the reason this great reader can say that is because of this problem that she hasn't recognized, but I already know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because something I've noticed in my own writings, as I'm rereading old you get to a certain point and you're like, I really want to take a walk.
Yeah.
I'm so tired.
Yeah.
I'll have lunch now.
Yeah.
And you have to be really like introspective, right? And go like, okay, the reason I wanted lunch right there is something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing when I fix that. That's going to fix every comment that people said because I'll have to go forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting a 5-minute sign over there. So
Is our fuel running out?
Yeah, okay.
Change the subject.
I do want to ask you one more question here. And are we going to have time for Q&A with the audience for a bit?
Let's do a little. I mean,
Yeah,
our
yeah.
audience seems like they have to pee, but that's okay.
Okay. This one of the things that I found absolutely mind-blowing about this book was that, in a way, this book is very Manichaean in the sense that good and evil seem to be perfectly balanced. Kindness and treachery seem to be perfectly balanced. You never have a sense in this book that I don't know. It didn't seem to me that you were suggesting that this is all going to work out. That the arc of justice, the arc of history does bend toward justice. You never quite get that feeling because kindness and cruelty do seem to be balanced so perfectly in the book. But having said that, and having lived through what we've all lived through for the past couple of years, epidemiologically, politically, and every other way, you managed somehow at the end of this book a kind of optimism, despite the Manichaean balance that you'd established. So you managed to pull off at the end of this book an optimism, both in terms of these characters and the setting that we've been talking about and the various thematics of the book. You managed to pull off an optimistic ending that kind of blew my mind. And I mean, it seemed right. It seemed perfect. You earned it in every way. But I guess the question, and I don't want to say anything much more about it because I don't want to ruin it for people in the audience who haven't read the book yet. But I guess my question to you is, given what we've been through ourselves lately and what these characters go through in this book, where on earth did you summon that optimism?
Making me cry. Okay, yeah, it's Manichaean. I like it. That's such a. It's real. Kind of. I grew up with the old modernist education.
Yeah.
You know that. So that's really in me. You know that the balance of good and evil. Okay. So that you know, and you know it's a permanent condition that we don't conquer evil.
Yeah, right.
But evil doesn't conquer good either. You know, it's a permanent condition. So I had an alternate ending that was much darker, that lived for a while. But in these times, it just felt too cruel to do that to a reader. You know? And so instead, it's so joyous that it made me fearful almost, you know, because you know, being Manichaeans, that to the extent I really am, but you know that the other shoe's going to drop. You can turn the last page and have a big. If you kept writing the novel, you know, or you move to season 6, you know season 6 is going to start with something terrible. That's the way the world is.
It better have, or it gets canceled.
Yeah, that's the way the world is, and that's the way HBO is. So get used to it, motherfucker. Anyway, yeah, that's such a compliment to you. I wanted to pull off joy, to pull off happy is. I think that's a great challenge to me. You know, it's something I want to do. It's basically I'm pretty optimistic. You know, basically, even though I can be pretty dark too. But wanted a book that would finish and go, you know, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though you know it's not. I just want you to have a minute where you can say that. Maybe that'll stick with you for a few days after you finish. Maybe you'll die before you find out what the next thing's going to be. And you could die in the joy of my book. Now, if that's not a happy ending, I don't know what is.
Also, these characters deserve that. That's the thing that I felt more than anything else. Is that you didn't suggest that they are going to correct the problems of the world, or that their joy in this book I thought was just 100% earned, and that's because you really didn't give them anything that the world doesn't give. I mean, the world gives us joy,
Yes.
and you found the absolute right and appropriate joy for these people who have worked so goddamn hard against the longest of odds. They deserve this, and it's a very generous novel written by a very, very generous author. Congratulations.
Thank you.